This lesson discusses domain names. The topics covered are: what is a domain name, how to choose a domain name, where to buy a domain name, and domain name costs. Houses, apartments, and offices all have an address, so they can be found. Websites have a web address, and these addresses are called domain names. The process of finding and directing you to a particular website is managed by the Internet's Domain Name System, or DNS. The way DNS works is rather technical and is not discussed in this training. You do, however, need to know which domain to choose, where to get it, and what it's likely to cost. There are two parts to a domain: the main word and the extension. Let's look at the domain $.com.au. The main part of the domain is the word dollars, and .com.au is the extension. There are various extensions, and the most common is .com, which is supposed to be for commercial organisations, but it can be used for anything. .net was originally for computer networks, but once again it can be used for anything and is a common substitute if the equivalent .com has been taken. .org is supposed to be for non-profit organisations. There are two newer but lesser used extensions, .info and .biz. There are specialist domain extensions too, such as .travel, and in the future there will be more of these, including .book, .sydney and .sony. If you are outside the US, it's often appropriate to use a country-specific extension, as this immediately shows people your location. Examples include .com.au for Australia, .co.nz for New Zealand, .co.uk for the United Kingdom, or the generic .asia for the Asian region. The rules for registering a country-specific domain are often more rigorous than top-level domains like .com. For example, the .org.au extension is only available to Australian non-profit organisations. Choosing a domain is a bit like choosing a business name. You need to choose a name that sums up what it is you do and see if that name is available. Businesses typically choose their business name or a derivative of it, as do government departments and schools. But there's nothing stopping you from choosing a common phrase such as websiteplanning.com, golfing.com.au, or ancientromanemperors.net. Of course, you must do this within the boundaries of the law. For example, it's a bad idea to choose a competitor's name, a supplier's name, a trademark, or the name of a personality. Domains are essentially leased, and there is a dispute resolution process that can lead to a domain registration being revoked and handed over to its rightful owner. The ideal domain name is short, easy to remember, and hard to misspell. Start with a brainstorm and list all the names you might like to use. Then you need to discover if your ideal domain is available. Be prepared for disappointment if you're going after a top-level domain, as most common words have long gone, although sometimes they're owned by speculators who are prepared to sell them. To find out if a domain name is available, don't fall into the trap of simply typing the domain into a browser to see if a website appears. Just because a site doesn't appear doesn't mean the domain is unregistered. Some people might buy a domain and just sit on it, or they may be using it purely for email addresses. Instead, you need to go to a domain name registrar and use their lookup tool to discover if a domain really is available to purchase. You might like to start with your web host, as most are able to obtain a domain name for you, and it makes sense to have all your services managed through one entity. Alternatively, you can register a domain directly through one of the many domain name registrars available worldwide. You can find one for searching for Domain Name Registrar. Domain name competition is extensive and prices vary considerably. Expect to pay $30 to $140 for a country-specific domain. Top-level domains such as .com can range from $10 a year to $80 a year depending on where you buy it. Specialised domains such as .travel can cost some hundreds of dollars. That concludes this lesson on domain names. You learnt what is a domain name, how to choose a domain name, where to buy a domain name, and domain name costs. If you don't already have one, it's now time to choose your domain. Or perhaps you'd like a second or multiple domain names pointing to your main site. If you haven't organised your hosting yet after the previous lesson, go ahead and contact a host now, as they can provide both services. Once again, I recommend you choose one of the hosts listed in our resources section, as they are the ones we have personally worked with and know Joomla inside out.